Hello, hello. Welcome to Talking Tunes, and today we're going to be talking about the 6 tunes on the Yes album from 1971. Now, Yes is a progressive rock band that doesn't need much introduction. They put out their first album in 1968. They put out their second album in 1970. In both, right, there were lineup changes in between that album and in between the first album and the second album. And of course, between their previous album and this album, there was one major lineup change. Guitarist Peter Banks left, and guitarist Steve Howe joined, and Steve Howe would remain a member of the band until 1980, when he would leave while the band went on hiatus for about 3 years, and then the band came back in 1983 with 90125, and then that just started, a chain of, departures and, joinings and rejoinings and a whole lot of bullshit that I don't have to talk about today because we're simply talking about this album. This album contains, if you're a Yes fan, the rest of these names will be familiar to you. This this version of the band contains, along with guitarist Steve Howe, vocalist John Anderson, bassist Steve Howe, keyboardist Tony Kaye, and drummer Bill Bruford, all of which would go on to have many, credits to their name, mostly in the progressive rock space. But we're not talking about that stuff today. Today, we are talking about purely the 6 tunes on this album. The first of which is Yours Is No Disgrace. It is 9 minutes and 43 seconds of excellence. It begins, immediately showing off Steve Howe's guitar chops. It also shows off his backing vocal chops. Chris Squire's bass is more melodic than most bass playing. There's a nice calm bit in the middle, almost and then there's this almost 1950s type guitar solo from Howe. And then the second half starts very jammy, and then at the end, these violent lyrics, are sung in a very calm fashion. Death-defying, mutilated armies scatter the earth. That's how it's sung. And then, it begins musically. It's musically restated. The beginning is musically restated to tie the whole thing together. Great song. Highly, highly recommend it. Now, what I don't recommend as much is this next song, The Clap. It is a 3-minute instrumental acoustic guitar ditty that was recorded live. This was at one of the first gigs with Steve Howe, I think. It's certainly early in his tenure with the band. It's not a bad way to spend 3 minutes, but it's not, musically, it's nothing special. I wouldn't say musically it's nothing special. It just doesn't necessarily do a whole lot for me, if that makes any sense. Song number 3, Starship Trooper. This is one of 2 songs that is divided into 2 parts. The first part is Life Seeker. And Life Seeker is another Howe and Tony Kaye heavy tune. Tony Kaye is very heavily involved is very much a part of the sound on Yours Is No Disgrace. John Anderson's vocals are immaculate on Starship Trooper. Bruford's drumming is excellent. Squire seems a little bit buried here in some moments than he is on the rest of the album. It's not to say that you can't hear him. It's not as bad as Peter Gabriel's vocals on some Genesis albums, but it's weird. and then Howe and Anderson jam between the two songs, and that jam kind of involves the lyrics put to clap. Maybe I'm wrong, but it sounded very similar to me. To clap, the acoustic guitar playing that Steve Howe's doing the acoustic guitar bit. And then the B part is Disillusion, which is mostly an instrumental that shows off Steve Howe and builds in a way over the rest of the track, and it ends with with an excellent or with an exquisite solo from Steve Howe. And if you own this album on vinyl, that's the conclusion to side one. The first half of this album, fantastic. The second half of this album, also fantastic. It starts off with I've Seen All Good People. This is the other song that's divided into two parts. The first part is called Your Move. It has an a cappella beginning, which is actually, it's just, I've seen all good, the lyrics of I've Seen All Good People sung twice. It's the tune of I've Seen All Good People sung twice. And then there's this majestic acoustic guitar playing, wonderful vocals. There's a hint of flute or recorders. It's got a very English sound, and then there's a very grand organ sound as the song progresses. As the first half of the song progresses, it sort of builds. And then the second half of the song I've Seen All Good People is All Good People. And this is not effectively, this is just a different song that they didn't divide because of how the first half starts, which I don't have a problem with. They actually released this portion of the song as a single in the U.S., and it was sort of, how they broke out in the U.S. And I've heard the first two albums. They're not bad. They're just, this is a little bit more my style. But it's an excellent piece of classic 1970s rock and roll. That's what I've Seen All Good People is. It's weirdly enough, it's mostly instrumental. And the only lyrics are, I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. And those are, the only lyrics, but they're not repeated over, and they kind of are repeated over and over again, but not to an incessant degree. Maybe I'll touch on that, on the incessant type of repetition. Maybe that'll just be a general discussion piece that I do for this album. But this is, again, I've Seen All Good People, excellent song. Both parts are excellent. Highly recommended. I highly recommend those two as a standalone piece. It's a good introduction to Yes in general there. Song number 5 is A Venture. It's very indicative of where Yes would go in the future, particularly on their next album, Fragile, in terms of the overall sound. Lyrically, not really. In terms of length, not really. It's maybe the clap, but it's the only other song on the album that's below 6 minutes. So, yeah, it's a pleasant listen. It's not a bad way to spend roughly 3.5 minutes, but it's far from the best song on the album. I frankly give that to I've Seen All Good People. But that's not to say that this final song, Perpetual Change, the 6th song on the album, is, a bad song. It's a very good song. It's got a very aggressive organ intro that almost sounds like something Keith Emerson would play. Maybe not necessarily on an ELP album, but it definitely sounds like Keith Emerson. So I don't know if Tony Kaye had heard the first Emerson, Lake and Palmer album at that point, because it was out. But it was, very, very good. Very Keith Emerson-like. The rest of the band comes in, led by a Steve Howe solo, and then they, sort of, not necessarily drop out, but they calm down really quickly for Anderson to start singing some stuff. And then it builds back up again, and then there's sort of, I call it a call and response. I don't necessarily think that's the correct term for this, but basically Anderson sings one thing, and then Chris Squire and Steve Howe sing another thing. That was another dynamic, great dynamic that was added with Steve Howe, is that because Chris Squire and John Anderson had been there from the beginning of Yes, and those two would kind of harmonize a lot. But you add in Steve Howe, you get sort of a third part. And granted, these very high, alto and high tenor basses or high tenor melodies or parts, and it's pretty good. John Anderson almost goes to soprano at certain points, I'm pretty sure. But it's and then there's a very mellow jam in the middle, followed up by an almost ELP jam. It's very Squire Bruford K focused on the jam. And then it comes back to the main melody with some synth sounds, and then, another jam plays us out, and it's, again, great use in 9 minutes. Buy it. Go buy it. That is the first time I've said that about an album. I think since Rattle That Lock, maybe? No, I said that about, Court of the Crimson King, so never mind. Go buy it. This is an essential album to own if you enjoy progressive rock. I think it's a great album to own in general. I will say this cover isn't as visually striking as some other Yes albums. Even their previous album had a better cover than this, I would argue. But it's just a photo of the band, and then there's a mannequin head and a random chair. So there's that. But go buy it. It's fantastic. I think this might be a first print version of it, because I can see on the back, it kind of like a record, I can see the outline of the disc on the back. And the pamphlet actually kind of smells like an old record. So this is an old copy, but it still works perfectly. So yeah, that's where I'm gonna leave it. I think this album is fantastic. Go buy it. If you have enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all that nonsense. If you want to hear me talk about something other than music, I have a podcast with two of my buddies. It's called Dorkies. I will leave a link to the most recent episode of that in the description down below. And if you want to hear what I happen to be listening to that day, or a 15-second segment at least, you can follow me on Instagram. I will leave a link to that in the description down below. And with that, I would like to thank you all very much for watching. And I would like to remind you to stay weird and keep jamming. See you in the next one.